So guys, we're just starting to record this call. I'm recording it starting a little bit late, but don't worry, you haven't missed too much. John and I have just been catching up on a few pleasantries and getting his background, and we're going to get to questions in a little bit. And John was just talking about how, as a physical therapist, he has transitioned into a more fuller, comprehensive approach to strength training that he did not find in his background as a runner and as a triathlete, but he also didn't really find in his very intensive, extensive schooling as a PT. So he's just about to jump into that experience right now.
A lot of it was my personal experience was within the running community growing up. I did kind of what my high school coach told me to do. And it wasn't, it was very much running, maybe occasional, some core work, a couple planks here or there, but it wasn't very structured or formal. And when I was dealing with injured runners as a physical therapist, a lot of what I started to realize when I talked to them about their training and what they did, and as I started to work with them was, hey, you know what? They have some areas that are a little bit weak. They have some areas that are a little bit stiff, a little bit tight, but their training didn't reflect that they were trying to address those weaknesses. And so I started to realize a lot of the stuff that I was trying to give them was very much all the other things. It wasn't so much, hey, they don't need to necessarily work on their endurance. They're going to get their endurance with their training.
You were like
supplementary stuff.
It was like focusing on all the supplements, but they were missing like the principal ingredients on the plate.
Exactly. So that's a lot of where I was looking for answers on how do you strength train? Because to be honest, I had no idea, and school didn't really necessarily teach me.
Other than the occasional like plank or body weight, little core exercise.
Exactly. And what should it look like? Or, if I want to add a kettlebell or a barbell to somebody, how do I do that safely? Because those tools can look very intimidating. To anybody.
Especially the kettlebell. It's like iron, it's heavy, it's got that like weird little handle.
Now we got 6 of them over there on the ground.
Oh yeah.
Jenny was nice enough to buy those for me for Christmas. So
hey.
We're all good.
That's a good present from a wife. She knows her man. I like that.
I bought him and then told her about it, and then we agreed that was my Christmas present.
You know what? Even better. Sometimes it has to be done that way. Well, cool. Well, guys, now's the fun part. We get to jump into some calls, and this is fair game. You've got both of us. You got me. You got Kirk. You've got John here, and we can talk about you and about some of your programs. So I've got a few questions that people wrote in ahead of time that I thought were really good that we could address. But go ahead and type in that question bar below, and we can, start to address some of those questions live. And if you guys are in a place where it's not too loud in the background, I'm happy to unmute you. I have that power. And we can actually have a little bit of a conversation, and you can talk to John directly. So as you guys are thinking about questions you might want to ask in the little questions tab, for those of you guys who are on the call, we're going to go ahead and knock out some of these calls, these questions from some of you guys who came in early. Let's start with this one. This is from Jordan Fairley in the bottom, and he asks, can you discuss how you determine if a chronically injured, I'm going to put this in the tab so you guys can all see this too. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to do a little screen sharing. We're going to go crazy, and you guys can start to see some of these questions. Here we go. So can you discuss how you determine if a chronically injured athlete needs to perform injury-specific strengthening exercises, or should all exercises be full-body functional exercises, i.e. squats, deadlift, burpees, kettlebells, etc.? And I think what Jordan is trying to say is, if I've hurt my knee, when should I just do clamshells and Jane Fonda exercises, and when should I integrate into squatting and deadlifting and some of the bigger things?
Yeah. I mean, Nate, you and I have had a couple of conversations about this. I think it's a really fascinating one. And it kind of reflects, my personal kind of evolution with it, where at a certain point, initially it was all about injury specific strengthening. That was what I was trained in. And then as I came out and I started to learn about strength and conditioning,
so if your calf hurts or you've got shin pains, you're going to do little shin raises and toe raises and things like that.
But then
do the alphabet with your ankle and everything.
Lots of TheraBand everywhere. Yeah. Tie yourself up in it. Then I started to recognize the value of full body functional exercises. but then I started to ignore the injury specific. But I actually
So
still
you went too
wasn't
far the other way.
too far the other way.
Okay.
So I think, we've asked
I
some of these
think I did the
questions.
same thing too,
Yeah,
actually.
exactly. I think there's value in doing both, right?
Okay.
Um,
So what I've always found, Jordan, is that just as John was saying earlier, there's like the micro approach to things and the macro approach to things, and they relate to each other. So if I'm having specific issues with a joint, my wrist, my elbow, my ankle, or my knee, I do need to zero in on that area. But my understanding of that joint's movement and its role is really predicated on my larger picture understanding of how my whole body's supposed to move. And as we talk and reinforce all the time, and as you guys know, I can't talk about run technique alone in a vacuum without addressing your general strength and movement and posture and position, because your running mechanics are going to be a reflection of that. In the same way here, I can't just talk about how you've hurt your calf without talking about how you move your whole body. So let's say someone comes in and they have, an injured, let's see here. Penne asks, actually, this is good. He says, I still get running for fun. Penne, don't email him, guys. I'm showing you the screen unless he wants to be. I still get knee pain after 7 miles, 1 year after meniscus repair. Is it okay to push my miles up anyway? I do Nate's exercises regularly, couch stretch daily. And actually, this is a good question because, we've done a good job of motivating our athletes in our program to really believe in the power of this stuff. But there's almost a danger in being like, well, I did the couch stretch today. I've checked the box, so I'm good to go. Right.
Yeah.
So, given Jordan's question about like, okay, micro versus bigger movement, and Penny's question about knee pain with miles, what are your thoughts there?
For Penny's question, yeah, I mean it's a really interesting question. Is it okay to push my miles up anyways? I would say it really just depends on what you're talking about here. Are you talking about pushing more than the 7 miles in a given run when your knee starts to hurt? Or are you talking about maybe just backing off and accumulating more days of the week with your running and increasing your mileage that way?
So instead of thinking about, instead of the duration of that one run, thinking about more consistency. Sure. And actually, I know a lot of elite runners now are starting to split their long runs.
Right. That's interesting. But in addition to, like Nate was saying earlier, it was also maybe working on those other things as well. If 7 miles is your limit right now for what the meniscus can handle, maybe stay there, but work on all the other things so you can still continue to improve in other ways without necessarily having to expose your meniscus to more injuries or to more compression per se with running. So maybe that's where your meniscus is at this point, and maybe it'll be able to handle more in the future. But there's still plenty that you can do out there that's part of Nate's program that's still going to be very beneficial.
So we always like that approach in terms of, the worst feeling as a runner is you're injured, it's a nice sunny day, and you feel like you're back in elementary school stuck in timeout. You have to sit in the corner. You can't face everyone. You have to face the corner, and everyone else is out playing, having a good time. And you're like, man, why can't I play and be out there with all the other kids? We're trying to say you can play, just for right now. Maybe you have to play with a different toy. And if you get good at that toy, that's actually going to help you, play with everyone else. So Penny, we want to think about little short-term strategies. I would say if you're starting to deal with some knee pain and longer runs, one of the first things I would go to would be your cadence. Do you start to fatigue and slow down? Does that cadence start to drop, which means that you're starting to land a little heavy? If that's the case, can we do simple things like, hey, can we do some cadence check-ins? Can you even run with a metronome? And that might be enough to just keep that technique together just that much better so that that pain isn't there for those runs. We could also think about, your warm-ups. I know you're doing the couch stretch daily, which is fantastic, and that's helping that knee out a lot. But what's the preparation look like? I also like pattern disrupts in our long runs. Sometimes if you think about how you guys are maybe sitting or standing in this call, we just kind of ooze into ugliness, right? We start with good intentions. You guys are like, shit, I'm on the Run Experience call, and Nate and John are there. I got to be sitting up tall, or maybe you guys are at your standing desks. But we just sort of ooze into whatever comfortable, familiar position we get into all the time. So that can play a factor with our running. We start running really well, but then we just relax into something that's maybe not as ideal, not as quick and efficient. So are there ways to, change that a little bit? And one of the things that I've been doing with my long runs, Pene, is adding some sort of movement or drill in every 10 minutes, where I would stop for 10 minutes. I'd knock out 10 squats, think about one or two things, or I'd add a run drill that I was working on for that week. And those are little short-term strategies to help you out. Should you, push your mileage if your knee is still hurting? This is a gray area of separating, soreness, right, from pain.
Right.
How do you help patients separate soreness, workout soreness, from damaging pain?
Yeah. So, I mean, particularly if we take a look at Penny's example, it's a great one. So if we're talking about meniscus repair, it'd be interesting to know, is this pain the same pain that he was experiencing prior to the repair? So if it's right in that joint area and it's very familiar, then maybe that is something that your body is telling you as a warning sign, versus more, hey, it feels like my muscles, those big muscles in the, in the quads or in the calves, they're getting a little bit of soreness, but that basically goes away within a day or so or immediately after a run. That's probably fine to push through. So very much trying to differentiate. Yeah. So is that a familiar pain that's related to that meniscus? But very much, one of the common things I'll say is, hey, does it feel like it's in one of those joints? Those joints are things, those are usually the warning signs that, hey, maybe that joint needs a little bit of a break, or maybe it's pushing that threshold. Muscles are very resilient. They heal remarkably well. And those are the ones that, hey, if it feels like it's that very familiar muscle soreness, goes away in a day or two, feels better after you warm up, probably fine to push through.
Then we're all right to push through a little bit. And there's always a risk reward factor. Risk-free training doesn't exist. It's a lie. If anyone tells you about it, they're liars. We always have a cost to things. So if it's like the race of your life, you've been training, your whole family is coming out to watch you, and you have a little knee pain and you've done most of the training, you're close, maybe it's worth the gamble of doing the race. But you also have to be okay with the potential consequences of hobbling around for a month or so afterwards. It's February for most of you guys. It's the beginning of what should be a pretty kick-butt year. Sometimes it's worth thinking about that longer-term approach to your running, and being a little bit slower and patient in the short term, and thinking about that long-term approach. Demetria had a similar question. And Demetria, I'm actually going to unmute you if you're all right with that, and we can actually chat with you a little bit. So you're unmuted. I'll give you a chance to settle yourself. But Demetria asks, I'm in the process, and I'm just going to, we'll talk live.
Okay.
There you are. We hear you. So Demetria asks, I'm in the process of recovering from patella femoral pain, which is, your kneecap. Syndrome, pain syndrome. We have to get the syndrome in there. Working on strength and stretch exercises to improve muscle imbalances. How do you know
Yes.
balanced? Is it a scale? Can you put your quad on one side and your hamstring on the other and measure it? How does that work?
Well, they told. Oh, I'm sorry.
I know. I'm poking you a little bit, but this is something that we're smiling because we've been there too, and we know. We hear this stuff. I've been taking it easy when doing workouts, kettlebell, cardio, circuit training, etc. by modifying routines that bother my knees. What other training can I do until I get stronger? Those are good questions, Demetria. So where are you at right now with your running? What are you trying to do this year?
I wanted to run a half marathon, like first 10K, then half marathon, but it depends on if I can run longer distances without any pain. Because what I normally have been doing, if I'm running outside, which I really haven't been because we've been getting hit by snowstorms every week.
Where do you live, Demetria?
I live 30 minutes north of Boston.
Oh, okay, that's cool. I'm actually originally from 30 minutes north of Boston.
Oh, okay.
Funny story. I grew up in the Acton Concord area.
Okay. I live in Lawrence, right next to Andover,
Yeah,
Haverhill.
yeah, I know that
Yep.
area perfectly. That's great. Yeah, you guys are getting your butt kicks a little bit out there.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you the weather in California. You won't want to talk to me anymore. Um, so do you have you figured out which race you want to do yet? Your 10K and half marathon. Do you have any circled on the calendar?
Well, the half marathon's July 7th.
Okay, so we got some time there.
Yeah, and then the 10K, I'm not sure. My friend has to send me the information, but I think that might be in May. And
Excellent.
I also do a lot of the Spartan races and stuff like that.
Oh, very cool. I've yet to do those. I'm really interested and I think one of my goals is to sign up for one this summer for sure. Um, and have you done a half marathon before? Is this your first one? Have you done a few in the past and been fine and now you're dealing with pain? Or is this kind of the first time you're trying to scale up your mileage and you're dealing with some issues?
This is the first time that I've done I'm gonna try to do a half marathon. The longest I've ran as far as like a road race has been 5 miles.
Oh, good for
And
you.
I've had no problems running that. And then trail running would probably be like 6 or 7 miles without an issue.
Hmm.
But recently, I think probably because I scaled up and then I got injured because I was wearing the wrong shoes, which I thought they were the correct shoes at the time. And I didn't notice a difference until I was wearing like more shoes that had no support that were neutral when I
Hmm.
was doing cardio. And I'm like, my knees aren't bothering me now. And
Hmm.
then I went to a running store. They did a running analysis on me, so I was wearing the wrong shoes. But I didn't realize when you switch sneakers that you have to give yourself time to
Hmm.
adjust. So I just went straight into doing my routine, and then I strained both my knees like within
Mm.
15 minutes.
And I definitely want John's, professional opinion on the right versus wrong shoes. So you were in a shoe that was a little bit more neutral, and
Well,
it,
the
it you
first
weren't experiencing
shoes that
problems.
the first sneakers I was wearing was for people who overpronate, which I don't do.
Okay,
And I wore those sneakers when I was running for over a year
okay.
and didn't realize it until every once in a while my knee would hurt me, but it wasn't anything. It would like it'd be like maybe for a few hours after the race and I would be fine afterwards. And it would only be more my right knee, but
Mm,
now it's both my knees.
okay. So that was the shoe you were originally in, and then the running shoe fit you into another shoe, or the running shoe put you into that more stability style shoe.
Oh, they took me out of the stability and told me to be in the neutral because I
Okay.
was wearing, they said that I didn't need that.
Okay. But then there was
And
the little adjustment period.
yeah, that I didn't realize that you were supposed to give yourself. Like I never knew that you shouldn't keep doing your workouts at full level because I was like working out at least 5 days a week, sometimes twice a day. And I still kept doing it instead of like
Mm,
maybe easing off a little bit and like take it slowly
okay.
so I could give my body enough time to adjust. I just went full throttle and jumped in and
Yeah,
injured
jumped
myself.
jumped right in. Yeah, you did. You gotta keep it up. Well, this is a really great question, and it's a common problem. Dimitri, I've been there. I've switched shoes, unknowingly, and kind of felt the repercussions. I honestly think it's almost like a rite of passage in a weird,
Mhm.
sick, twisted way. I think most runners on this call are kind of laughing or smiling to themselves a little bit because they've all, felt this type of pain. Um, John, what do you think? What do you think about, right versus wrong shoes? Maybe like what she could do right now?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. About the shoe question is always interesting because I think what we really know about how running shoes affects what we do when we run is not nearly as well developed as we would like it to be. Uh, in reality, a lot of the stuff about overpronation and stability shoes or motion control shoes it's really inconsistent. And so a lot of it is, yeah, I mean, there may be that little break-in period to see how the shoe affects your body as a system. But it's an interesting one. I don't know.
So what and maybe we can do this via
Yeah.
call. Like, what is pronation? Why are shoes set up as stability, moderate stability, and neutral? Like, what does that even mean?
Right.
And and like, what's the training that like most run stores are getting?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the basic gist, like if you look at your foot and you're looking at that inside part of that arch of your foot, and when you walk or when you watch someone walk and run, what you're looking for is, what does that arch do? Does that arch basically, does that collapse flat to the ground? Does it stay really, really, really high, or does it do something in the middle? And it's a really subjective call, to be totally honest, on whether someone's pronating or not pronating or overpronating. And ideally, what they're trying to do, the theory is that if you overpronate where that arch really collapses to the ground, you put them in something like a motion control or stability type shoe.
And you're kind of creating stability from the bottom up that will then help stabilize the knees and stabilize the hips and everything else.
Yeah. And that's the theory behind it.
But what's the cost of giving someone too much stability?
Right. Yeah. Certainly the concern is you start to remove the body's that input to your body to try and do it on its own.
Yeah.
And that's always the kind of that short term. It's almost like using a crutch, essentially, of a short-term crutch of, hey, let's post you up. Let's remove your foot and your body's demand to try and stabilize itself. And, it's an interesting trade-off to see what happens afterwards or longer term.
Yeah. So, Dimitri, where are you at right now with your shoes? Are you still wearing the neutral shoes around all the time and trying to kind of figure out what to do? This will be interesting. All right, starting part 2 of our call. We had a little wireless flub, the joys of technology. But you guys are runners. You know how to stick it out. Right on. You guys are all in there. Well, so Dimitri, we were asking before we got unceremoniously cut off, we were asking about kind of where you're at right now and, what you're doing with your shoes.
Oh, I've been wearing neutral shoes.
Okay.
So with no support or anything.
Okay. So one of the things that you can do is, balance your shoes if you're trying to transition. Like if you're trying to transition to a more neutral shoe, you could wear that shoe around during the day to try to strengthen those feet. But you could also wear your more supportive shoes on some of the longer runs where you're starting to feel the pain, and then kind of slowly segue yourself into the more neutral all the time.
Okay.
Now, when you go to a more neutral shoe, your feet are working harder and your body's having to work harder a little bit. So what would be some, mobility and strength things that she should be doing and thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when you come out of those more stability type shoes, even, especially after a year, those calves tend to get very, very, very tight and stiff because they tend to lift you up a little bit higher. When you get into those neutral shoes, then that heel may not be quite as high. So really trying to stretch the calves out is going to be really critical. Rolling the bottom of that foot with a lacrosse ball, because those muscles are going to be working overtime compared to what they're used to do. So those may get a little tight, a little sore as well. So keeping those nice and loose on the bottom as well is going to be really important. And yeah, like Nate said, just walking around in neutral shoes during the day, or even just standing around barefoot doing some stuff where you're really focused on around the house, barefoot, making sure that arch is still there. You're using your muscles on your own to keep that thing moving. Those are just some really easy things to do.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I would really think about, whenever you're kettlebell swinging or squatting or anything, it's great that you're in there doing the movement, but it's not just checking the box of the movement itself. It's really how you move that matters. And, a lot of it. Have you ever been told that you're quad dominant or that your hamstrings or glutes are not very strong?
I know my hamstrings are really tight.
Okay.
And my calves.
And the calves are tight. So one of the things you can do in the short term is, work on these movements, but one of the things we do at the gym a lot is really tell people how they can initiate these movements from their hips a little bit more versus their knees. and some of our videos around squatting and everything else, we sort of have that in there. So that's going to be really key, because that's going to take some of that pressure off your knees. It's going to allow you to go through a greater range of motion, develop that control, and ultimately that strength and stability. So you're on the right track. We might need to just kind of feather your approach to shoes. Your feet are working harder and your whole body's having to work a little harder. So we just need to be really mindful of that. And I think you're smart to put your body ahead of the race.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. Well, perfect. Let's do this. So I'm gonna mute you now, and we'll
Okay.
try to go for someone else. Thanks for being on the call.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and do this. Where am I trying to find this here? Oh, it's not letting me do that right now. That's fine. If anyone else has any questions, for whatever reason, I'm not able to see my questions screen right now. Where's my little questions tab? Got the chat. Well, we got some more calls up here. Let's go ahead and do this. Aaron is asking, my pronation on each foot didn't even look human. There was so much flex in my ankle. Is this going to be an issue for me? In the past, I've been fairly injury-free, but watching this video freaks me out. I'm not sure which video she's referring to. Maybe sort of one of our squatting things. This is probably looking at that pronation and that collapse.
Right.
Have you found some things with squatting and affecting your feet?
Yeah. I would say, squatting barefoot has been a really interesting thing to experiment with, and really
Cool.
see how does your ankle and your foot handle going down into those deeper ranges of motion through that hip, through the ankle, and through the knee, and learning how to really just try and maintain that arch and not let that arch just collapse like crazy while you squat, which is basically, if that happens, you're looking at that pronation, and learning how to control that there carries over a ton to a lot of the other things that you do on a single leg, like walking, running, things like that. So yeah, that's been a great, fantastic tool.
That's really cool. So that's one of those things that can really help with the pronation of that foot. And then, starting from there is obviously so important, because, the more we can learn to develop that foot stability in much more controlled static positions, we actually have a chance.
Yes.
When we actually do some running stuff and everything else. That's really cool. Ooh, I like this. Nancy asks, how do I find a balance between maintaining endurance and allowing the IT band to heal?
That was a great question. What are your thoughts? That's a good one.
I'm going to unmute Kirk too. Hey, Kirk, can you see the questions? I can't see the questions right now. You have?
Yep. Oh, are you talking about like the ones on the document or the previous ones?
The ones in the go-to webinar control panel. It should be under attendees and audio and other things. If you can, cool. If not, no worries. But I'm unmuting you now, so
Yeah,
you can chime in at some point.
Are you looking for a specific one?
I just wanted to see if there are new questions going in, so I couldn't see them, so we could answer people's questions who are live on the call. But
just a lot of people talking in on how they can't hear us.
Hopefully they can hear us now. Well, guys, if you have questions, Kirk is there, and he'll be able to read those things too, and chime in himself. Kirk, what do you think about maintaining the endurance and allowing your IT band to heal?
It's got to do with if you have a specific goal and if it has a timeline. That's kind of the first question. If you got like a race in a month, you might need to, bite the bullet and just go for it if that race is important enough to you. But if you're looking at something down the line, like in August, if we're talking about right now, maybe take a step back and make sure you can even get to the start line before you really even care about your actual training outside of that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah,
Presumably,
getting the timeline set is going to be step one.
yeah. And presumably, if your race is, say, a couple weeks or a month out and you're starting to feel some pain, you've also done the lion's share of your training, so
Right.
sometimes those fear-based decisions start to come in. I'm not in shape enough, so I need to go out and get that extra run in, when in reality, a little bit of rest and hardcore mobility stuff would be really good, and you'll still get to do your race. But you're right
Yep.
about the longer term approach. Um, I can't just grind my way through months out and expect a good result. Um, Kirk, have you dealt with any injuries in the past? Like, what are things you've dealt with?
I still, to this day, have to really dig into my left quad or else I get runner's knee.
Okay, so you still get a little bit of pain there. Um, and Kirk, what's your background so that we can these guys can
Yeah.
get a little sense of you. So you were graduated from CU Boulder and you were a triathlete there.
Yep. Go Buffs.
Go Buffs.
Um, yeah, I graduated in August of 2014, and from my sophomore year of high school until my sophomore year of college, I was competitively racing triathlon, draft legal stuff. So not just running, I was swimming and biking, and then you know started turning my focus into strength and conditioning, kind of, and decided to take a little leave. That and swimming and I weren't getting along very well anymore, so I decided to take a leave from the sport of triathlon, and now I've been running an endurance program here in Boulder, Colorado at CrossFit Roots, and that's kind of my deal that kept me out here. I'm from California, where Nate is right now, actually. So I decided I was going to stay out here and develop my career as a coach. I
Yeah,
still run. That's my new gig.
there
Or
we go.
not new gig. I just kept doing that. But I still swim and bike, just not competitively.
Yeah, and guys, Kirk is being all, quiet and shy on us right now, but if I'm not mistaken, he may have a few, national collegiate championships to his name, as part of
Hey
the
now.
Buffalo Triathlon team. And his little spat with draft legal racing was racing the junior elite, circuit, which was basically the feeder program for future Olympic hopefuls. So, not messing around. He's definitely got a little speed and skill to, in him, and under into the tank. Well,
Thanks
that's
for
cool.
tooting my horn.
And then also what's cool about Kirk, and the reason why I wanted him to get involved with the run experience and really help you guys, is just like us. He's really obsessed with, how we endurance athletes can do it better, how we can be a little stronger, how can we be a little bit more mobile. Being at the pointy end of races for so long, he's just obsessed with, I mean, at one level of performance, but now just making sure that running feels good, because we're all at different levels. We all
Right.
want to enjoy the sport, and a lot of times we can't enjoy it if things hurt. So that's kind of a cool little
Yo.
thing. Well, guys, if you have questions, ask away in that questions tab. We'll be on the call for a little bit more for sure. Remember, this time's for you. If any of you guys want to go live, we can unmute you, have a little conversation. Um, I'll look
Yep.
at
No more questions
no more
pouring
questions
in
right
right now.
now. That's right. Y'all
Cool.
are making dinner, putting your kids to sleep. I get it. Don't worry. We'll answer Dan's question here because this is an interesting one. I tore both my hamstrings in college playing soccer. Hopefully not at the same time. They
Oh
have been
man.
okay up until I started playing soccer again. The sprinting mostly is what makes them feel sketchy. How do I prevent another episode? What do you think, Dr. John?
Oh man, combination. Definitely hamstrings are a tough one, particularly tearing them. So most likely, if there's some pretty bad tears, there's probably some pretty gnarly scar tissue in there. That's definitely some stuff that can respond well to some mobilization. Get in there with a kettlebell handle, get those things moving a little bit better. But then on top of that, if you're talking about sprinting, you gotta get those things stronger as well. So starting to dive into some of those things, like Nate was talking about, learning how to load the hips, but not only the hips and the hamstrings with squatting, deadlifting, those types of movements. Those are things that definitely can start to build that strength up in those hamstrings. But then, also about sprinting, what Nate was talking about with cadence and technique, that can be huge in trying to help prevent future hamstring strains of any kinds. They talked a little bit about in some recent research, they're talking it's a lot of times it's during that deceleration, that foot's reaching forward and trying to pull it back under. That's, a lot of times where you get those hamstring strains. So learning how to not overextend when you're sprinting can be really critical.
So that's interesting you mentioned overextension. And Kirk, have you messed around with any sprinting at all?
Personally?
Yeah, or just with at the end of races maybe. I know sometimes people really try to lengthen their stride when they sprint, which is what you're saying about maybe the dangers of overextension, and that hamstring is actually trying to slow your heel down so you don't just totally overextend your knee, and that's where a lot of that pain comes from. I was just curious if you, Kirk, had messed around with any sprinting stuff. I haven't done too much other than soccer when I was younger, but
Yeah, no, I was always a distance dude.
Yeah, you were always a distance dude. So just learning how to be more integrated. I found such a connection between the hamstrings being tight all the time and lack of stability in the spine and in the hips and in the hip stability thing. Which in short order, Dan, is why we always say squeeze your ass in everything, but it potentially like at the top of your squats and in your push-ups and other things like that. Because the way I think about it, and I was an athlete who dealt with chronic hamstring issues, even as a distance guy, when my glutes aren't involved, my hamstrings are hanging on for dear life. They're doing all that work alone. But if you can start to sort of integrate some of those other muscles, and you can think about that just by thinking about better positions overall, all of a sudden those hamstrings aren't having to fight the fight alone, right? They've got a little bit of help. So I would do that. And then, make sure that you warm up like a crazy person, before you get out on the soccer field. And we're bad at that, just like runners are. We just got to be out there and be hot and sweaty, done our little leg swings, our hip circles, the things that you guys know, and that can make a huge difference for sure. Let's see here. Let's get Tammy's question in. Tammy says, my range of motion in my left knee is limited. I'm trying to figure out if it's due to arthritis, which I have in my knee, or tight hamstrings and calves, which I know I have. My right knee is better than my left. How can I approach increasing mobility in my knee specifically?
Great question.
What do you say, John?
Yeah. So if you're looking at something where if there's some arthritis in there, I have some tight hamstrings and calves, right away you can start off on trying to deal with those tight hamstrings and calves that that they're there. So regardless of what the status of how the knee joint is itself, if you have tight hamstrings and tight calves and those things aren't letting that knee get into full extension, then I would go after those things right away, regardless of whether or not the knee is going to let you get there in the end, because it'll be beneficial for you to get the hamstrings stretched out, get the calves stretched out, start to mash those things out. But then also working on the other side of the chain, which is definitely going to be trying to get those quads to fire a little bit better to maybe get that knee into full extension. But then also just looking at how you move, in the end, that's kind of what comes down to is why is it that your knee range of motion is limited in the first place? So are you loading the knee a little funny or too much during some of your other movements? So
that's always like a chicken or egg question, right? Is it I'm tight and I'm stiff and my motor patterns have adopted around that stiffness, which continues to feed into the problem, or have I always kind of moved weird and been a little disconnected? That's a technical term, guys, move weird. And all of a sudden I've become immobile as a process. It's always probably a messy combination of both. And, we sort of want to work on those things. But, I really like the idea, just as John said, of, getting into those hamstrings and calves a little bit in those quads, to give that knee a little bit of slack so it has a little freedom to move around. But then also, that's only half the battle. We need to reinforce that message by going through range of motions where the body feels safe and comfortable and in control. And that's honestly where we start with some of that squatting, And then, what would be good for knee extension stuff? Standing up tall,
Yeah.
doing knee extension exercises. What
Yeah,
would
I
you...
mean, even just standing up as tall as you can and just firing those, squeeze the butt, squeeze the abs, and then just fire those quads to get that last little bit of knee extension. Even just standing around would be a really easy way to just get that last little bit of knee extension.
Yeah, so I've always seen this, especially when I bring new athletes into the gym. They want to stay in that athletic ready position,
Right.
where everything is a little bent and things are soft.
Yeah.
How is that different from what we're talking about?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I've had this discussion a lot over the past week with some people who are talking about, I've always been told like I shouldn't lock my joints out. I should always be
it's almost like
ready.
bad and painful to lock out your joints.
Yeah. But really it's if you're not one of those people with really hypermobile joints or joints that it hurts in a way where it just overextends like crazy and it hurts the back of the knee to lock out. Locking the knees out is not really that dangerous, particularly if you're using the muscles to help support it. So if you're firing those glutes, firing those abs, firing those quads, you're all good. It's not necessarily going to cause any long-term issues at all. If anything, it's probably going to be beneficial that you're using your joint through that full range of motion. So it's completely fine. And the idea is, like Nate said, was, hey, sometimes there's that value in getting to that athletic posture, but we also need to know how to stand up tall and be in that full extension too.
And guys, the way sometimes you'll hear me think about this or talk about this and describe it is I talk about switching gears. The ability that, as runners, we get really good at very specific tasks. You guys are better running long distances at one speed for fixed periods. We're better at that than most other athletes are. But all of a sudden, we're not as adapted to, busting out a sweet dance move at your next wedding or, skiing down a hill or helping your friend move your couch, mostly because we haven't practiced that. And that's why we're always saying we need to really build our athletic foundation to feed into our running foundation. And part of that athletic foundation is developing these other gears as a mover and as an athlete. And part of that means being able to squeeze your ass and lock that shit out. So Nancy is saying, let's see here. Nancy is asking, are you guys still talking? Yeah, no, we're on, Nancy. She's timeline is 8 weeks out Boston. Can't back out of this one. Nancy, I'm going to unmute you because I'm doing Boston too. And I think that will be really fun. Let's see here. Oh man, for whatever reason, I'm not allowed to unmute you right now. Hey Kirk, can you unmute Nancy possibly?
Yep, let me try.
Okay. Do you know how to do that? Just go over, right click over the little red microphone. So Nancy's talking about Boston. Nancy, I'm training for Boston too. I'm pretty excited. We can talk about a little bit, yes, not being able to back out. Maybe you're dealing with some bumps along the way and you're trying to figure, you were the one who's asking about maintaining endurance and allowing the IT band to heal. I got you. So with Boston, Nancy, what I would really work hard on is, not only rolling the IT band itself, but rolling that outer part of your quad, that vastus lateralis. And usually it's not the IT band that's usually the issue. Right. It's sometimes the quad or the hamstring kind of gets stuck.
Yeah, underneath it. It's all that other stuff underneath that IT band, because that IT band is crazy strong.
It's really, really strong.
So it's a lot of times, the stuff underneath it that's more the issue.
Yeah, that makes more the issue. So Nancy, if you've seen some of the videos, like in the injury prevention series, make sure you go into the quad section. And, we talk a lot about east-west foam rolling versus north-south rolling. And what that's going to start to do is actually separate some of those other tissue and fascia from the IT band itself. And that can make a huge difference. You just need to be so good on that, every day, twice a day, religiously for the next few weeks. And just like Kirk said, you're in the in-between thing. Like, you still need to train hard. It's an important race. You really care about it. So you have to suck it up a little bit and keep going. But for your ability to do that, you have to pay to play. You got to really dive in on that mobility and strength. And I think that will make a big difference. There's also things we can talk about with, shoes and gear and technique and all that stuff. That's important. But the short-term mobility stuff is probably where I'd start there. Well, very cool, guys. So we got a good chat. It was really fun to have John on here, and you guys got to meet Kirk as well. If you have any questions about anything, email Kirk 24/7. He'll respond back within 30 seconds.
Immediately. Yep, I'm on it.
he's Johnny on the spot with all those things. And I'm glad you guys got to meet John. We'll get John in again, especially for those of you guys with some of the more specific injury-related questions that he's really allowed to discuss and answer and diagnose because I'm not a doctor, so I can't. I can talk about strength and movement and running for days, but I'm not legally allowed to diagnose anyone, especially on the internet. That's usually a bad thing. Well, guys, it is 6:34 my time. Thank you for logging in and being on. For all of you guys out listening to this afterwards, thanks for tuning in and listening to this. This is part 2 of the call. There's going to be 2 recordings because, hey, we always want to make it harder. Why would we make it easy?
Right.
That's not fun at all. Well, guys, have a good night. Thanks for being part of the TRE crew, and we will catch up online.